How's it going, X-Men? I'm going to see if I can't help you out with randomizing waypoints, and I have two examples to show today. So let's get to it. The first example here is going to fire off the randomizer on mission begin. Okay, so think of all of these red connections or target links as sort of a pulse, and each MCU here is sort of like a node or a stop that the pulse has to go to and then do whatever that MCU is asking of it. Think of I use the term pulse because it's a great example, like in your body, right? So your blood flows through your body and it gets to certain MCUs in your body, like your heart, and it has to do something like gather oxygen or release oxygen. And it also, then it gets to your lungs and grabs that oxygen, and then it gets to the rest of your body, your liver, and all that. And so that's the same thing we got going on here. So if you constantly think of that sort of aspect, then to me at least, it makes a lot of sense logically. Okay, so we have our mission begin, right? And then immediately we have a 3-second timer. That 3-second timer pulses this deactivate all gates. All right, and so what that does is it deactivates all these gates over here for our fighters, and also all of these gates for our bombers, right? And that means that basically we've closed the gate so no pulses can go past any of these 4 gates here or any of these 4 gates here. So no pulse will hit these waypoints and no pulse will hit these waypoints. Okay, so we're doing that right away. As soon as the mission begins, we're deactivating all the gates, so no pulsing can fire off. Then right after that, we have a 100 millisecond timer here. So and then we process our randomizer. That randomizer chooses one of these activates, just a single activation. So let's say that it chooses activate set 1 here. And what that does is it now opens this gate to allow pulses or blood or whatever to flow through. And that means this MCU waypoint and this MCU waypoint will fire. However, these will not, because they were initially deactivated via this gate right at mission begin on deactivate. The same thing for our bombers, right? Gate 1 will open for our bombers, allowing the bombers to go to these waypoints and no other waypoints, right? All these are disabled. And that's the gist of it. So then right after that, we have a 1-second timer. So remember, we're activating the gates. We're opening and closing the gates using activation and deactivating, but we're not pulsing the gates yet. So we have a 1-second pulse all gates, and what this does is it'll pulse all of the gates here to let the blood flow. So if it did choose gate 1, like I said earlier, then now this will fire because it's been pulsed to say, hey, do whatever it is you're supposed to do. And in this case, this is a waypoint MCU, so it's going to say, hey, bombers, I need you to come to me. And so the bombers are going to go blue with the sound effects and everything. They're going to fly right to it and continue on, typical of waypoints, right? They'll get to this one, and then once they get into the yellow, it'll pulse to this one, and then once they get into the yellow, it'll pulse to the next one, and so on and so forth, right? The same thing for our fighters. Now, the nice thing about the fighters is I only have a pulse all gates only to this takeoff command. So it's a little bit different. This is what I was talking about in my post. So the takeoff command will happen is our fighters will take off. No randomization here, right? But you'll notice I have 4 on takeoff events to each of the gates, right? If we open up this leader, we can see we have 4 on plane took off events right there. And what that does is it will, once the planes take off, once they're up in the air and they have wheels up, it will pulse all of the gates. But remember, only one of the gates has been opened by our activation. So if it's gate 1, like we were talking about earlier, then even though all these other gates have been pulsed, they're not going to be activated, or they're not going to, no pulses are going to go through because they've been deactivated, sorry. And then this gate will pulse, and so the fighters will go to this waypoint, and then they'll go to this waypoint, and so on and so forth, right? So this is how it's done for on mission begin, right? So we're immediately, every single time the mission starts, we're randomizing which way the fighters will go after they take off, and which way the bombers will go, assuming that they're starting in the air. And you can see here I have them starting in the air, right? Air start. Okay. So that's on mission begin. That's the on mission begin style. And of course, I will give you the group and let you take a look at it, reverse engineer it, and so on and so forth. Okay, so this one is a little bit different. This one is the bombers are flying along, you know, they're doing their little thing, and then they get to a certain waypoint, and then we randomly choose which waypoint they go to. The same thing for the fighters, right? So the fighters will take off, they'll fly their normal flight, and then all of a sudden they'll be like, whoa, 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 we found the bombers, and I need you to go to whichever one of these waypoints, right? And it's completely random, just like before. So let's take a look at how this logic works. So we have our mission begin. It pulses a 3-second timer just like before. And just like before, we deactivate all of the gates. So all of the gates are deactivated right away. Okay? Then 100 milliseconds later, we fire off just the initial bomber waypoints, right? Just the starter bomber waypoints. So the bombers are going to start flying towards this waypoint. If I can actually make them fly, there we go. Right? Then they'll get to this yellow circle from this waypoint MCU, which will pulse the next bomber waypoint, and then they'll fly to that one. Right? And so once they get to this waypoint, it will pulse this 100 millisecond timer, right? Which in turn will randomly choose one of the gates to be opened, which will then set off a chain reaction for, you know, the bombers to fly to that particular waypoint. I also have a deactivation here. So you can see it has like an X. That's because I'm setting it from this 100 millisecond to the deactivate and immediately right after. And the reason I'm doing this is just in case, for whatever reason, the bombers fire a second pulse to this waypoint somehow. Like there's a second pulse that happens maybe, or a third or fourth, even a 100. It doesn't matter, right? Because we've closed this timer. We've closed it with this deactivation. It's just like a gate that these timers are over here, right? We closed it. So now no more pulses can go through, and so there won't be any more randomization. There won't be any other crazy messages going off, and so on and so forth. All right. So let's get back to this. We got our 100 millisecond timer. We immediately randomly choose one of the waypoints, and we let the players know, hey, enemy bombers are sighted. Set course for, you know, whatever, grid la 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 la, grid la 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 la, or grid la la la, whatever it happens to be, right? And just like before, we're activating that particular gate. And then once that gate has been opened, and by the way, this all happens instantaneously. However, we're going to give a slight delay, so that's this 1 second timer, and then we're going to pulse all the gates. But only the gate that's opened will set off the waypoint, right? To allow the players to go there. Now there's a caveat to this logic. This particular logic here, there's a caveat to it. And the caveat is the fighter planes have to be slightly delayed than the bombers, right? Because the bombers are, hopefully, we want the bombers to reach, oh my gosh, let's go. We want the bombers to reach this waypoint that's going to set off the randomization before the fighters get to this waypoint. Because you can see there's no pulse after this waypoint. Nothing happens after this waypoint. It's because the bombers are the ones setting off where the fighters go to the next one. So if the fighters get here first, then what's going to happen is there's no pulse, so the fighters won't know what to do, and they'll just circle and circle and circle and circle and circle, right? Because they don't have another pulse. They don't have another thing that says, hey, go here or do this thing or whatever it may be. However, so you got to make sure that the bombers get here first. And in my case, the bombers will definitely get there first because they're starting in the air, and it's not going to take them long to get here. However, my fighters have to turn on their engines, they got to taxi, they got to take off, and once they've taken off, then they'll get to this waypoint, right? So it's going to take them a little bit more time to get to this waypoint, and then of course to this waypoint. So in my logic and the way I have it set up, it's no problem for the bombers to get there first, but that's key for this sort of setup. But it's a lot of fun because what will happen is for the players, they'll be flying like oh, you're just doing a regular combat patrol, just go down this path, da 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 da, da, right? Typical mission, and then all of a sudden, you know, the radio comes back and like, whoa, we found the bombers. I need you to go Gateway 4, you know, and fly that way. And the bombers will also fly that way as well, you know. So this is all for you, and if you have any questions, let me know, and I'll be happy to answer them. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.